Neil Armstrong had a strange encounter while on the moon and kept it hidden from everyone else for more than 50 years. The commander of Apollo 11 is among the legends of NASA when it comes to space travel, due to the feat he achieved by becoming the first man to set foot on the lunar surface on July 20, 1969. We are all aware of this historical experience. However, there is one event in particular that was hidden from the public. While on the moon, Armstrong encountered something that almost prevented the Apollo 11 mission from returning home. He kept it a secret until his death. What did the first man on the moon hide from us? The first moon landing has slowly become the realm of American mythology. This achievement was so astonishing that the decade of space travel was concentrated in a single event. It almost seems like on a summer day in 1969, 3 men boarded a rocket, traveled to the moon, put on their spacesuits, walked around, and planted the American flag before returning home. However, that was not all that happened. Neil Armstrong found something that he kept secret, but that was eventually revealed when he died. Before Neil Armstrong could take his small step for man on July 20, 1969, he and the rest of the Apollo 11 crew went through a rigorous training process to prepare for their lunar mission. Although much of their training took place at testing facilities and in the classroom, NASA also assigned astronauts tasks, such as collecting geological samples. They also trained entering and exiting the lunar module to help build muscle memory and replicate these procedures on the moon. To make the team's training as realistic as possible, the crew trained at select sites here on Earth that looked eerily similar to lunar topography. NASA was searching for locations similar to the moon, and astronauts trained at various locations in the United States and abroad to learn about the geological features they would encounter on their mission. The field training was highlighted because NASA wanted the astronauts to learn the muscle memory steps to collect samples and take photographs without wasting time. They practiced collecting and analyzing soil and rock samples at multiple sites, as well as digging trenches and collecting samples at different levels. Selecting locations and collecting samples, they practiced describing geologic features verbally and in writing, documenting sites with photographs, and labeling samples. NASA turned analog missions into a regular training tool for astronauts. During the landing of Apollo 11, Neil and Armstrong faced a problem when the computer indicated an error code 1202, and they did not know its origin. Controllers in Houston searched for the problem as tension grew on the lunar module. Communication was failing, the computer was having problems, and the flight director was worried about the control center's lack of power. The problems began after the separation of the command module, with radio link problems. The flight director admitted to making decisions about how much information was sufficient. The order was given to begin powered descent and rocket brake landing, but communication was lost. Armstrong tried to fix the problem, but the radio connection kept failing. If the situation worsened, the mission would have to be aborted. Meanwhile, several alarms were activated in the lunar module cockpit, including the overload alarm, which indicated an overload if the landing computer was reset. Due to this alarm, they would have to abort the mission instantly. Flight controllers on Earth were dealing with communication issues and intermittent radar data during the lunar landing. The computer received too much data, which caused an unknown alarm in the lunar module. Flight controllers on Earth made the decision to continue with the landing as long as the alarm did not repeat itself constantly. Despite another similar alarm, the astronauts went ahead with the landing, focused on the instruments, and Armstrong controlling the landing manually. However, a new problem arose. Its location was not as planned. Armstrong suggested thinking about powered descent, but then lost communication. He tried to solve it without success. If it got worse, they would have to abort. The master alarm sounded, and the landing computer indicated an oxygen overload during landing. Neil Armstrong asked Houston for clarification about the alarm sounding in the cockpit. Mission controller Steve Bales decided it was safe to continue as long as the alarm was irregular. They decided to continue with the landing, since it was almost as dangerous to attempt an abort with a faulty computer as it was to continue. Fellow astronaut Charlie Duke relayed the message into space, saying, "We continue to raise that alarm." Even though the computer issued another alarm, they decided to continue during landing. They were focused on the instrument displays and Armstrong was in manual control of the landing. However, another problem was slowly beginning to appear. They were not where they were supposed to be. Armstrong remembered that in the commander's window there was a grid calibrated at his height, which allowed him to check his position on the moon. However, the irregular gravity of the moon and the extra speed acquired when they unhooked from the command module caused them to overshoot the planned landing zone. Armstrong had a poor view of a vast field of craters and rocks the size of trucks, rather than the smooth, flat area shown on the orbital map. Piloting manually, he looked for a soft place to land. During the lunar landing, Armstrong and his crew were nervous due to the strange trajectory and low fuel level, which meant they had to abort within 60 seconds. Armstrong looked for a soft spot while he calculated speed and range. After landing, the crew went through their checklist, but a pressure buildup was observed in the consoles. The situation was reported and they considered aborting the mission, but the heat from the engine melted the ice and the problem was resolved. After 3 hours on the moon, Armstrong and Aldrin attempted to open the lunar module hatch after completing their checklist. However, they discovered that they could not get all the air out of the LEM and that there was still too much pressure. After several attempts, Aldrin had to peel the edge of the hatch to open it without breaking it. As Armstrong exited the module, something broke, turning out to be the ascent engine arming switch, presenting another dangerous problem for the mission. Buzz Aldrin noticed something unusual on the floor of the lunar module as he prepared to leave for the lunar surface. He discovered it was a broken circuit breaker that had become dislodged from the vital ascent motor arming switch. He realized that he and Armstrong must have accidentally hit the switch with their large backpacks while trying to exit the lunar module door. The circuit breaker was broken and needed to be pushed back so the climb motor could turn on and take them back home. Houston couldn't find a solution, so they inserted a pin into the opening of the broken circuit breaker to push it in and hold it in place, thus ensuring the operation of the climb motor. If the motor arming circuit breaker fails had closed, Armstrong and his crew would have been trapped on the moon. In case the pin had not worked to fix the broken circuit breaker, Mission Control and the crew would have looked for other ways to close the circuit and start the ascent engine. After valves fixed the broken circuit switch with a felt-tip pin, it was decided to keep a guard on those switches on later lunar modules. Despite how improvised the arrangement was, the ascent engine was successfully ignited, and the astronauts were able to return to Earth. Aldrin still keeps the broken switch and pin he used, while Armstrong kept a bag full of small pieces from the Eagle lunar module. After Armstrong's death in 2012, his widow gave the storage bag to the National Air and Space Museum in Washington. The curator of space artifacts found Neil Armstrong's wallet exciting, as it contained valuable objects from the lunar mission, such as the safety rope, equipment supports, lights, and an emergency wrench. It also included the optical sight and camera that recorded iconic images of the lunar landing. Armstrong kept the bag secret for more than 40 years, and although the bag and its contents were moved to the command module before the lunar module was crashed on the lunar surface to prevent its destruction, it is not known how Armstrong obtained the bag. After the mission, the fact that Armstrong hid artifacts from the space mission, even from his wife, is unknown and raises questions about his motives. As for the mention that Armstrong and his moon team broke some rules by bouncing off a part of the moon to take pictures of some interesting rocks, that's baseless speculation. There is no evidence that the photos turned out to be of extraterrestrial origin.